Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today you are in for a treat.
Nice.
Don't say I don't do anything for you, because I am joined by a very good friend of mine, someone who has as much experience as anyone in the industry, Mr. John Schoen. John has been on stadium gigs with the likes of Katy Perry, One Direction for 4 years.
Yeah, about 4 years, yeah.
Also played for JP Cooper. Your career has had some humongous ups in. But today what we're going to talk about is we are going to talk about the rises, the successes, but also the what happens next. How do you deal with success, and also what happens when something finishes? So firstly, I think we start with your rise to success, which you've been telling me about, which is incredible. So tell me how that first gig that led you, the sliding doors moment that led you to the 150 stadium dates with One Direction.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to this. Firstly, thank you for having me. Absolute pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, where do you start? But we can start at the beginning, but it's a long old story. But I think what got me up to that run is a succession of, and ultimately a very lot of hard work. I mean, that's number one. We know that. We know that it takes a lot of hard work. And a few just moments of luck that came about. But I started working really straight out the back of university. I actually was working during my university, which probably should have done, because I had to try and blag my way back onto the finishing this course. But I was just so interested in working in the industry. So I started off in theatre. That's how I did. And I progressed through assistant MDing in kind of like touring theatre for kids, really, kids theatre. And I went on to work on cruise ships and various things. And I was just kind of getting my craft together, really, of working with musicians and how to manage musicians. And then that career kind of like kept coming back into a bit of theatre, a bit of pop. And I was actually going back into bar work, and, you know, a lot of juggling, as we know, with any kind of career. You go forward, you go backwards, it's more of a sideways journey, right? So, and then I got a call for doing some stuff on a kind of a UK R&B band, and I began to cut their backing tracks for their live tours. Yeah. And then I just became like kind of this go-to programmer keyboard player for like the urban industry. And I'm talking like the urban kind of music scene in the UK was about probably like 2010, 2011. You're talking like Chipmunk, Ironic, you're talking the N-Dubs, like Tayo Cruz. Those are kind of like bands that I was working with. I was that kind of cool, kind of slightly geeky keyboard player, you know, that could program sounds, and that kind of set me aside. And then I just kept on getting called back to do more and more, and my kind of career progressed through Marina and the Diamonds, and then up to Katy Perry. We did support tour for her, and then I did stuff with Gabriella Aplin and X Factor, and yeah, quite a few other acts came along during that time, and then on to One Direction for stadiums for.
So yeah, I mean, the one thing that's quite difficult for musicians is just because you get a gig, most gigs come to an end at some point. But one thing that you, like, as you pointed out there, was whilst you're working very hard, to string a success of gigs together is very difficult. So how did you get, so you landing a gig is brilliant, you know, whether that's an audition or someone you know, but how do you then go from gig to gig to gig?
See, that's your question. Like, you know, I think during that time, there was a lot of work out there as well. So that was on my side, you know, but it didn't always roll from the back to the back, you know, back off one off another. I would get quite actually frustrated on in my early career, because I'd get this chunk of work for a couple of months, and then I'd be like, that's it, I'm full time in the game, and it would stop. Right. I would be like, okay, it's back to the office. And I used to work in advertising as well. So I was working for like Asda magazine at the time in Publicist Blueprint, which is in, I think it's in Marylebone. And I'd be back in there, and I'd be like back to the office, and I had a taste of it, and you just want a bit more, you know? So it was fluctuating. But the more I gave, the more I kind of pushed in, the more I networked in, and the more I did that extra bit that nobody else would want to do, because I just lived and breathed it, the more people believed that I could do it. Right. And it was this turning point for me where I got asked to arrange strings for a live lounge, and there was nobody that could do the strings for a live lounge apart from me in the camp that I was in. Yeah. So I was like, I can do this. I'd never really written for violin or strings before. You know, I'd done a bit of stuff at university. But that set me aside. Having those extra strings to your bow, those extra tools, they really do help you. When that moment comes, that opportunity comes, you can grab it.
The being ready thing is so
the being ready, being ready, you know, having that toolbox that you can go, I think I've got this. And even if you aren't fully prepared, you're willing to take a risk that's saying, actually, I think I've got this. And I've got that brain that basically went, I'm going to solve this problem. Even if I don't know, I'll work it out as I go.
Yeah, and put the extra hours in to figure it out whilst you're doing it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then all of a sudden, you know, fast forwarding a little bit, all of a sudden then you're on a huge tour. It's Katy Perry tour, right at the point where she's, you know, at her biggest, where she's doing Firework and all
Teenage Dream.
Tracks, I mean, huge tracks.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're playing mostly arenas.
Yeah. So we're playing arenas at that point. So I'm opening up so we were invited onto the tour because Katy had seen Marina at the time, and she just absolutely loved Marina. She loved what she stood for. She loved her first album, The Family Jewels, very operatic album. And we joined that tour, and it was the height of that tour. I think it was 2011. And being in that arena world for the first time on a large-scale American pop show was just like me being like a kid in a candy shop. Because I've always been interested in holistically everything. I've never just been into the music. I've been into everything that wraps around that music, whether it's the video, the screens, the sound, the smoke, the props, the lighting, what it takes to put a show together. And that fascinated me. And I would watch that show religiously. We were on the tour for like almost 2 months. And I got to see how the machine really worked at its slickest.
And you did say as well as that was the defining moment that then taught you about playing larger gigs and the slickness of the American sort of market, pop market, and how you put a show together. Because most of the stuff you've done then is as an MD rather than just a musician. So you're there not just in charge of going in and playing keys or playing strings, but you're also then in charge of the whole musical arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, essentially that the job is, as a music director, is to basically be that conduit between the artist and the band. And also there's management there as well that are also inputting. So you're really in a managerial role. You're managing that band on a day-to-day basis, but you're also kind of having conflicting or joining arguments or debates with the creative teams or the management or the artists about how they see their music. So you're quite pivotal, and you're having to execute those decisions live. And watching Katy Perry, her musical director, a guy called Adam, I think, he's a drummer, and seeing how they did it, how they segued things, how they extended versions of the records, how they enhanced it for live, but they didn't take away from, you know, amazing production that had gone into these records, and how the show kind of moved through the gears and through the notches, and where to put guitar solos in, you know, where to put the drops in, where to put the crowd just drum breakdown moments. So I begin to see how they draw that from like the gospel scene in America, or how they do that, which is fascinating. And that's really where I learned that craft. And without that tour, that sport, I don't think I'd be able to put a stadium show on.
Right, and then obviously we'll get to the huge One Direction thing in a minute. But one thing that is really clear, you know, I really think that this idea of you've got to be ready, and everyone just goes, I'm ready. But there's a big difference, and being ready comes from experience. One thing that we were talking about earlier is you did X Factor for a whole year?
Yeah, about 2 or 3 years actually in the end. Yeah.
But what was amazing about that was the pressure when you're going to judges' houses and you're just given or going to arenas and given different arrangements, and you might have 50 songs to learn, and you've got to go in front of 10, 12,000 people and literally just a couple of notes on your piano, and it's just like, you're in, go. I mean, that's a huge pressure.
Terrible pressure. Yeah, it's disgusting pressure, to be honest. It shouldn't be like that, but it is.
I don't think I would be good under that kind of pressure of 50 songs and the live audience and everything and national TV. I think everyone would love to just go, I could do that. I think, you know, I feel like I'm quite experienced as someone who's done many gigs, but that's a very different type of pressure.
I think it is. I think you're up against a wire, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're drained, and you've still got to retain that information. As well, you're dealing with people that haven't gigged before usually on X Factor, so you've got their nerves and their, you know, changes the phrasing, and as well as trying to get all that into a minute and a half bit of material, times 50, as you just said. Really tough, really tough. But that comes with a lot of methodical working prior to doing these kind of like X Factor shows. Is how to like notch out songs really, really quickly. It's how to framework the song really fast in your brain. You know, I am not the best person to retain information at all. But what I got good at was just being able to sketch through or remember songs quite quickly. Right. It's just a learned craft. It's not a dark art or something you don't know. It's just practice. It's just years of doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really good. And so then, okay, so we're going to jump. So then there's the peak then. Go. So, or what I would class as the peak, where all of a sudden you get the call and One Direction are, you know, that's the biggest session gig in the entire world, I would say, in the pop aspect of it, where you're playing.
I think so, since the Spice Girls, right? Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
So you get that call. All of a sudden, you've got 4 or 5 years of doing this. You do 150 odd stadiums. I mean, life on the road. Just give us a window into what it is like being on the road, doing stadiums a couple of times a week with that kind of touring schedule.
It's rubbish, Damian. It's rubbish. Yeah, I mean, we were, no one saw the way it was going to go. I don't think anybody did predict the level that it was going to rise to and the rocket that it was going to be propelled to so quickly. But it did. I was originally contracted for one UK tour. We're going to end up in Bournemouth, in December, on a cold December UK night. And that would have been the goodbye. Thanks very much. We've had a great time. See you later. But by this point in December, we realised that actually it was blowing. It was blowing in America. It was blowing around the world. The market was right. The conditions were right. The vacuum essentially was there, ready to be. The world needed a boy band.
Right. And you said that the figure that you gave, the gross of the tour.
Yeah, I think if you check the Wikipedia, and someone who probably will fact check this, but it's I think the final stadium tour was around $360 million, and I don't know what you could add. I have not added them all up together, but I think maybe Ed Sheeran might have tipped us off the 20th post, but we were sitting at the 20th most successful tour in history.
20th most successul.
And there's been a lot of tours,
a lot of history,
and that's a lot of old money as well. So you're not going to ever beat Fight off Led Zepp and the Stones. But I think Ed Sheeran's got right up there now. But One Direction was sitting, that tour, that 2014 tour was incredibly successful.
At that point, because of the amount, one thing you said was earlier on when we were chatting about it, is the size of the tour was so big towards the end of it that from a tour bus point of view, it wasn't just, bands go from van to splitter van to potentially their own bus with a trailer on the back to potentially having, an Arctic. They had, how many tour buses were?
By the time we finish, we're looking at 15 tour buses.
I mean, and each one of them is probably going to cost a couple of grand a day. So you're burning through 30, 35, 40,000 pounds, $35,000. Just in buses.
And we haven't talked about the food budget yet either. All the wages. I mean, you've got 100 odd people on that tour, 100 crew, and various level of degree of wages. So yeah, your costs are going to be high, but your profit that you're making is insane. We're talking merchandising. Yeah. We're talking, I think at one point every person that walked in that door on average was spending $60 on top of their ticket.
Wow.
So that's you times that by 50, 60,000 a night.
Yeah, crazy, man.
We had to have seats because it's an underage gig, so there's a safety measure in there. You couldn't have it in the round, which is where you take out the seats and you have the stage in the middle, or you couldn't have no seating at all and do a standing gig because of the health and safety risks. So actually you're still losing 20,000, 30,000 seats in there, but you're still making the insanely amounts of money.
And you've got an assistant at this point.
I am happy to say that at this point, they wouldn't like to be referred to as assistant, but an audio engineer, essentially someone helping me just continually moving the backing track system in terms of its delivery, an audio expert, that was my rock really of trying to, if I need a new tracking or new system place or new set of backing tracks repositioned, they would do all that work. Whereas in the early days, I was doing all that myself,
And so as it grows, and so there's a lot of pressure because at this point, you can't let the side down. There's no backup. You're touring, you're in Mexico or something. You can't be ill.
We haven't got a backup band in the back of the splitter ready to go. We don't just unveil the shipping container and a backup band pops out. That's not going to happen.
So, Niall might get ill, but you're not allowed at any point.
in no way, shape or form were we ever allowed to get ill. And I have seen it, and I felt crap. I've never actually been at a point where I feel like I can't go on. Right. I've got a good immune system, touch wood, touch this desk. However, I have seen a couple of people on various tours that I've been on that I've had buckets next to them because they're going to vomit at any point, right? And that's not from they've had a heavy night out. That's because we're in countries where, you know, you can get food poisoning and illnesses quite easily. But the show, as the famous saying goes, I mean, the show must go on.
And it does. And so,
anyway.
So while we're in the success, just before we move on to the next bit, because it's going to get dark in a minute, but before it gets dark, what would you give me a huge, like if someone said, look, obviously it's all a massive, big, huge, amazing thing, but when did you kind of get to a point where you just went, wow, that was something I remember as being like ridiculously amazing, just even a high point of a high point? What would you say was the highest point?
I think there were a couple of really good standout moments to me, and I think, you can never remember every venue because it sounds ridiculous to say, but even if you were to try and remember each stadium, it'd be impossible, you know, because they all roll into one big ball anyway. Same with an arena, same with a theatre. A couple of really big standout moments. The first one for me is, and I knew that we were catastrophically becoming super successful, world dominating, was when we were doing the MTV Music Video Awards in America. And I was playing here, and I turned to my left, actually not that much further from where you were. And Michelle Obama was there, Rihanna was there, and Drake was there, and they were singing along to the song. We knew that was pretty big. The second event was probably where we had rehearsed this stadium tour in 2014, and we flew into South America, and we were about to unleash this stadium concert. And I was with the creative director, good friend of mine, Lee Lodge, and who did a lot of Spice Girls stuff, and he's done Sam Smith and all sorts of phenomenal creative director. And we were standing there, it was a night before the gig, and I just looked around, I had like a Colombian espresso, and it was like, and I do mean a coffee, we were just hearing back the audio mix, and I looked around, I was like, tomorrow this is going to be filled with like 90,000 people. We're going to do this. And it was incredible. From that moment that firework went off, you're like, that rush, that adrenaline rush of a stadium, there's nothing like it. And the final one was the Wembley Stadium. And for me, that is the most iconic stadium in the world. Rather than the Hollywood Bowl, or, you know, one of the big, you know, European stadiums. It is, for me, Wembley Stadium, British after all. And I used to go past that in like a taxi before Uber on the way to IKEA to pick up some shelves or some, you know, that lamp that everybody used to have. And I said, one day I'm going to play that venue. And one day I'm going to go up there and I'm going to play it. And I remember 3 nights, Wembley Stadium. I never really buy anything extravagant in my life, my friend, ever. And I treat myself to a brand new Mercedes-Benz AMG. Black rims, white car. And I drove into the stadium on the day we were playing, through the stage door, and I parked up on the stage, almost pretty much underneath the stage. And I got out and I just walked onto stage. So this is my gig, man.
I have arrived.
I've arrived. Yeah, that was probably a moment for me which I'll never forget. And it's not a kind of like, materialistic, like I had cars and things like that and, you know, whatever. It was the fact that actually everything that I'd worked so hard for and sacrificed so much for, it wasn't in the car or the money, it was in like that iconic venue and being able to not just turn up and do it because we're one act of 12. It's like, this is my show that I've created. Right. This is our show. Yeah. You know, and we're selling this out for 3 nights, and I never have to look back and say, I wish I got to play that stadium because I did it.
That's amazing. All right,
that's it.
That's good. So we are now.
I got quite emotional.
Yeah, that's good.
He's going to win these glasses. Are going to cover my tears up.
So we're at the top now. This is the high point.
We're flying.
But then all good things come to an end, and One Direction was 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, and then at that point, you get a call or whatever and say, this is the final rally, this is the final tour, you get the final day, and tell me about the feeling of the final day and sort of what goes through your head when you think, we've just had 4 years of basically living out of a suitcase. Where do you go from there? So how do you feel?
It's an utterly bizarre feeling when you've been doing it for 5 years with this same family. I remember Nick Fife, a bass player from Jamiroquai, said to me when I used to be in a band with him, and he used to say to me, you know, you really don't appreciate it or understand it when you're in it until you finish it, you know. I was like, yeah, I can see where he's coming from, but to feel it firsthand of like, when we knew it was ending for a long time, but it's very much a sense in the same way that grief hits you. It's like, you know, a close family potentially is going to get old and die. You know that's going to come. But nothing prepares you for the day that it actually happens. And the same happened to me on that event. You know, we were handed a plaque and a little commemorative coin, and it just felt a bit twee at one point. But
you said it felt like you'd been in a war.
It felt like being in a war, yeah.
It's got like a little medal.
And, you know, that's a lovely thing to have. But it's weird. We finished this X Factor performance. They ended where they started, essentially. And I think that was the right thing to do. And, you know, there was no more support. It was, you know, here's your gear. Get yourself a taxi and go. And I remember driving back I'd, you know, brought a house in the country at this point. So I was out of London and I was on this A1M about an hour up. And I just remember sitting there and I wrote this post about being a bit thanking it. It almost started pouring out of me. And I think I just had this kind of like, it's over. I'm never going to see or feel this level of what we've just been through, and nobody really will understand what we just went through in the last 5 years. It was very much like coming back from the Gulf, you know, or Iraq, or it had that sense of feeling, but it did not, that was just the beginning of what was a long, probably quite dark battle with the end of this part of my life. Right. Yeah.
And so you literally, that was the final day, you get yourself home, you're on your own.
Horrendous, yeah, on your own. I'd lived this life of opulence, of the candy box being fully open, of being adored, of being liked, of being able to walk into a city anywhere in the world and being like, come in, roll the red carpet out. That's what it was like. I used to walk down Los Angeles High Street and they'd be like, hi John, morning John. That's insane. And I'm just famous by proxy. It's not my band, you know, I'm not the artist. And then to go from that to, you know, the countryside of England with nobody, no support network. I was living alone. The girlfriend, my partner at that house, she was in New York. Right. I had no one to say it's going to be all right. It was just me and my thoughts. And I can surely vouch that there are other musicians out there that would have experienced that same feeling, not just because of stadiums, but because the work or the project they have has come to an end. And I maybe gave myself to that project, and maybe that's what was missing, you know. Right.
So getting home, did you have this, like, at what point did you have any idea what was going to come next? Was things running through your brain saying, right, what I need to do next is, or was it just complete, I don't know what to do next?
I think there was a delay. I think because I thought that actually the best thing to do would be to come home, and I'd got to renovate his house. So I basically was like, I'm going to take a year out now to renovate his house. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a sensible thing to do. But it wasn't. It was a mistake, really, to renovate that house. What I should have done is just gone far away on a beach and had the breakdown there. But I didn't. I threw myself again. So it's a form of like not stopping. I was like ripping down walls and, you know, plastering and all sorts of things. I'm going to take this. I'm going to. I'd been away from any sort of home and normality for a long time. I'd been on a journey that many people would never experience. And so I should have stopped, but I didn't. And so what happened is I just kind of was building this house and I would just break down every so often in the rubble. That's how it kind of worked for a long ass time. No. Carry on.
I just think it's really, like, this is something we talked about earlier on, that there's loads of blueprints of how to get to how to get to the next level, how to get to the top, how to do all this sort of stuff. The problem is what happens if you get there? Because there's no blueprints. No one tells you. And everyone just goes, oh, well, you're fine. You're sorted. You get money, you get fame, you get all the things that you want. People look after you. But nobody actually goes through it. And also, nobody tells you that it could come to an end and probably will come to an end at some point. And so because there's no blueprint, you end up with this, like, I'm kind of living in the moment. I've forgotten about the future. I'm just loving what's happening. And you become so, I mean, very similar story, but you do become so dependent on the lifestyle, whether it's people looking after you with tour schedules and routine and getting up and doing the same things and stuff, but you become reliant on those things. And then when it's taken away from you, it's like a tiger that's been put in a zoo for a lot of time and then let back into the wild and being like, go on, let's see if you can kill anything.
Exactly. And as a successful entrepreneur yourself, you can really relate to that scenario that happened to me. I wouldn't say that I was like, I don't know how to cook a meal. Part of those kind of like the catering and stuff, I loved having independence to cook again. I loved having the control over those elements. But what I did do was I was just burning through money in the same rate that I was earning it before, but I wasn't earning it. So I would take myself to see my mates, buy them all dinners. I was running up and down the country. I was, spending on the house, stuff that I actually look back on now and goes, would I have spent £500 on a radiator? Probably not. Would I have spent, a couple £100 on paint? And that sounds like, but I wouldn't. Now I wouldn't do that. But I was spending at the rate that I was earning, but I wasn't earning that money. Right. And it was inherently just, got to a point where I was like, I'm going to burn through all this, right. And I still wanted to keep spending because that was my only like cling that I had left to the old life. And I remember, in brief, I just remember that the turnaround, one of the start of the turnaround moments for me was when I hit the lowest point. And that lowest point was I was doing something in the kitchen, and I'd been on this journey of misery for probably about 3/4 of a year at this point. And I was in the kitchen, and it was an old washing machine that was in the house, and it broke, and all my clothes were just ruined, basically. All the dye had come out this blue shirt, and everything had ruined it. And it was like a succession of events, and the washing machine was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I sat on the floor, and I was like, became the ultimate, like almost like a victim. I was like, why me? Like, I've had enough of this. Like, this is not what I had, all that stuff. And I was crying, and I was like, just pouring out this on the floor for quite a few hours. And then this kind of like light bulb came on. And I think, again, you probably can relate to me because you probably might have that similar kind of style of brain, was like, okay, I've got two options on the table for me. I'm a bit of a problem solver. So I've got two options on the table. One, I can succumb to this and just accept this is my life, or I can fight here. And even if I do lose, at least I know I went trying.
Yeah, gone down fighting.
I've gone down fighting. And I was like, I'm going to pick the second option. So I was like, pick yourself. I had to do this for about 10 minutes. Like, pick yourself off the floor now. Do it. Get up. It was a bit of a, I make shows for a living. So in my head, I've already seen the HBO screening of this episode. I'm seeing the cameras like, get up. You can do it. It's like a bit like Neo in the Matrix, where he's like, he's been taken down. He's like, you can get up. And that was the beginning of what I believe to be the turnaround and the rebuild.
Right. That's really interesting. When it comes to, you said, weirdly enough, I had a similar thing. So when I'd gone through the selling of BIM, I remember driving home and just thinking, I don't know what happens next. I've gone as far as I can go. I've just got this routine. I have a team of people who help me with things on a day-to-day basis. I'm driving back. The loneliness for the next couple of months was horrific because everyone gets on with their life and I was just stuck in the house, scared of going out because I was scared that people were gonna go, oh, that's the guy who used to own a music college, or that's the guy who used to. And so I just used to go, I don't wanna go out today. I don't wanna go out. I'm just gonna work through it. And it was quite weird because I remember it took 9 months, and I remember it was a big legal thing. This is how much you're going to get to sell your shares in the company. I remember going back, getting a calculator. I was 30 at the time, and dividing, I figured I'd probably live till I was 75 and going, right, divide that money by 45 years of what I think I'm going to live next. And that's how much I'm allowed. And not one part of me was like, I can move on to the next thing. It was like, that was the end. But when you hear your story, you just think, yeah, but you did it. You finished the game. You did it. You completed it. You can't get bigger than playing a stadium, let alone 150 stadiums. But when it does come to an end, you don't just go, the end of the game, that was fantastic.
No, you killed the big boss. It's over. Let's buy the next game.
Yeah. So at that point, everything just goes, what do I do next?
And I think you don't know in that moment, because I think, like any grief, you're processing a loss. You're processing a loss of time, commitment, energy, social connections, ties, memories. In the same way, when you lose someone that you're close to, a person, you don't go, right, where's the next person coming from? You just literally, like, that grief, and every individual journey is different, but that grief takes time to process, and that grief might not have hit me to that washing machine moment. There might have been parts of it that were trying to come up and unsurface. I knew that I didn't want to start going on the bottle or like going, it wasn't me. I wanted to hit this face on, but it just wasn't coming. I'm like, I've just been scraping wallpaper for 20 hours solid, just so and I'm like, why did I do that? And then when I stop, I start to well up again. I'm like, scrape again, Yeah, so you're absolutely right in the fact that the human is so adaptive, it doesn't really want to sit in pain. So like you described there, you're mapping out your journey already, going, actually, I can survive like this forever. This is how I'm going to be. And I thought it was really amazing there you said about, I don't want to go out because I'm the guy that used to have this, or this is what I did have and it's been taken away. But you were the one in control of that decision to take that money. So it's crazy, isn't it? Sometimes we think, actually, this is what we want. We don't actually appreciate what we've just been given, and the future that it holds for us in new ways.
Yeah, and what you
can't now, see that, right?
And now what you're capable of because of the experience that you've got. So then moving on. So we had a bit of a dark period.
That's Act 2. We're going to move to Act 3 now, right?
But then what's really good then is the bounce back of going, well, hang on, and now there's a lot of doors opening. Now, you can't just jump onto another stadium level tour, because the thing with being a session player in pop scene is slightly different. If you're in the band, if you're in Muse, if you're in the Foo Fighters, that's fine. But to be a hired hand, there's not many stadium level gigs, or some arena gigs. But then how do you then get back on the horse? Or do you get back on the horse? How did you get music back into your life and then use that from a cathartic point of view? How did you kind of rebuild with music?
Really great question. That journey was a slow process for me, because for quite a while, I didn't have the energy to commit to I like that thing you just talked about earlier on about what do you do after you've achieved that success. Everything that I wanted to do, I'd done. So that energy and that initial drive that gets you to that place is gone. Many people have argued with me about this and said, well, if you loved music, you would have loved music no matter what. You would have been happy to go back down the pub and play on the old ivories, down there and still get, but it's not the case. I loved the lifestyle, and I don't mean just from a financial point of view. I mean, I loved the socialness of touring, the traveling, the culture, the gigs to me were like almost secondary to the experience that was happening. I've always loved social, being around people. So that was like that on steroids. Yeah. So how do you get back on that horse? How do you go, I'm going to jump in? And the first few gigs that I took I've got to be honest, awful. Right. The first gig I did back was some 2-bit rapper in Slough. And I remember driving to this place going, I can do this. Spending 15 hours in the dankest, most miserable, disgusting industrial estate in Slough, and driving home and again breaking down. I had to stop the car and break down and go, I don't want this. I don't want this. I want what I had before, And through that process, I tried to see, I had a lot of mentorship from people and some counselling and bits and pieces. And I just tried to start seeing it from a new perspective. People used to say to me, well, you're never going to get back into it. People think you're too expensive, you're too arrogant now.
I love it when you said that earlier, and that's quite interesting. When you've got to a certain level and it's like, you have this know your value, which is great on the way up. The problem is how do you know your value when you're on to the next thing? And it's like, well, I can't price myself in the same bit. So then, like you said, people will see you as either too expensive or too arrogant. Yeah, it was a great phrase.
Here comes the stadium boy. He'll be a grand a day. It's like, and that's not the case. That you're the same person that you left with. I am, because I didn't just come into stadium touring. I worked from the back of a transit van all the way up, so I know what it's like at every level. Not everybody has had that thing. So actually, I believe that I worked in a factory before I even got into music. I know what it's like to graft. Wasn't scared of hard work. It was the fact that I was almost energyless to do it again. And then other bits started to come in. I picked up various sort of educational talks, and then I began to get back calls of consultancy. I went out to and did JP Cooper, who had a big hit with Jonas Blue at the time, called Perfect Strangers.
Which is a very cool artist.
Yeah, and actually it was one of the most fun projects to work on because it began to reignite the musicality back into my life, and how do I convert the singer-songwriter into more of a kind of cooler pop show, but retaining his roots. That was cool. Went out to Nashville to do a band called King Calloway, which was a BMG kind of led boy band type thing. Which is great to move into a country market and be out in America working with, people that had worked with Zac Brown and Carrie Underwood and, Kelsey and Brad Paisley, all those kind of cool, country greats. And also then I went to Miami, did some consultancy on a brand new ship so those kind of consultancy jobs I thrived on because, again, it was all I was basically the one in control. I was coming in, I was offering my expert, but I felt valued. Yeah. That was what I'm trying to say to Damon. I felt valued again. And I felt valued for the worth, because you and I know that the music ladder is not keep climbing. And once you get to the top, you can just go, right, I'll jump to another band at CEO level, like you could in a corporate structure. It's like you just kicked back down the bottom of the ladder again. And here you are with all this expertise and knowledge, but you're back in the weeds again, fighting for the next opportunity.
And fighting now, people who are hungry, young, don't have the same responsibilities.
Much more hungrier, haven't got the same outgoings to pay for, aren't as physically tired, and I've got a lot of energy, but they want it more like I wanted it when I was 21 years old. So you're fighting that, you're fighting the next wave, and I wanted to be that consultant, and that work came, but it's very much a case of you get a bit. There's no long-term consultancy musical direction work. It's like you get an act that disappears, you get another act, and there are a couple of MDs that do that very, very well. But that's a big hustle. That's a long hustle.
But what I loved about the story is, when something ends, and I think I recognize when you said this, you don't automatically think of what's next, but what it's easy to see when you're outside it is you've built 10, 15, 20 years worth of experience, which is so valuable, which is the bit that people don't see. They just go, it's come to an end in saying, hang on a minute, I have fallen down the ladder, but at the same point, what I have built means that I can go on to a certain level of gig. You can trust me with it. I have got the proof, I've got the experience, and also I know this works. I'm the safest pair of hands in these scenarios. So whether it's consultancy, whether it's certain gigs, whether it's training, you don't think of it when it ends. But I guess what I'm saying is when musicians are going out and doing gigs and they're struggling and they're trying to put social media out and they're going, oh, it's just not working, I can't build the audience. But every post, every gig, every rehearsal, every song is one more bit of experience past somebody else. And so 5 years of doing that down the line, you start to figure a lot of stuff out and go, oh, actually, wait a minute. When it comes to working on someone else's project, you just go, oh shit, I really do know what I'm doing. I really have got a lot of experience to give. And I think that bit for me, where you had the rise, a massive rise, then what felt like a fall, but then when you realized and was like, hang on, I've got loads of value to give, it's just in a slightly different field, effectively, then you're back off again.
Yeah, and then that took a long time. It took some really good mentorship from a couple of really high experienced people. Actually, some people in the business world that I said, about a year ago, I sort of decided actually I didn't really want to go back in the way, but I love music so much. What can I do? And I met a couple of really good mentors that had run big corporations in music, and they kind of looked at the values and this is the values that you've got, and look at the skills that you've, just exactly what you said, look at the skills that we've had. And good advice for anybody that's going, actually, well, I've had this, what do I do next? Is to really go through that journey that I went through with good mentorship, which is let's look at your skills and how are they relevant to where you want to go next, and how can you repackage and repurpose those? For example, I now work with brands. I work with brands looking after their sound, internal sound. So we're looking at luxury, retail, restaurants, hotels, that looking for that customer experience when people walk through that door, what's going to make them stay there. That's my skill set. Yeah. I put shows on for my whole life. Now, I would never have realized that is transferable. And so when I went to a mentor, it's well, actually, let's change the word musical director to project manager, because you were project managing a boy band for 5 years, all different influences. Yeah, which is tough. Yeah, you can tell me when they're 16 and they're running around and you're trying to get answers from them. Yeah. So it took me a long time to get there, and the road was tough. But ultimately, I've made myself. I have become a better person out of the rise and both the fall. And I'm sure, as an entrepreneur, you'll agree that actually it's the falls that make you.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really have the rise without the falls. It's
100%.
cliche.
Yeah, it's when you have the fall and you realize that you have those failures and you just go, oh, well, now you don't realize you know how to deal with stuff when things are working. You're just making stuff work. When something fails, you just go, right, I've just learned. You don't learn from winning. You learn from losing. Is the phrase as such. So.
Obviously, you wish you didn't going through it at the time, but looking on hindsight, you're like, you know what, that kind of like made me really. Yeah. So an amazing experience, but one that comes with, like anything in life, it comes with pros and it comes with cons, and you have to be aware that what goes up must come down.
Yeah. I love it. It's a great story. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you much for having me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here today. So thank you so much, and I've learned a huge amount as well.
I've loved it. So thank you so much for watching. Do me a favor, hit the like, hit the subscribe. More importantly, just come and be a part of this community and send us some love down in the comments below. But from myself and this awesome shirt wearing John Showed, we shall see you soon. See you soon.